you could. I think if you can capture that in the audio edit,
trying to do something.
if you can capture that statement in the audio, we'll use that as our cold open.
Yeah, please tell me that got captured, dude. That was.
Hello, welcome to a renewed show with Sandals Church called the Theology Show.
We're back.
Trying to take a look at some of the things that are going on in culture, talk about it, have some good conversations, and just kind of give some perspective on maybe the church's approach. My name is McKay. I work here at Sandals Church on staff with our online campus team. I'm joined by the one and only Pastor Fredo.
And I'm a pastor here. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did I interrupt you?
I don't know. I mean, we're still figuring it out. As you can tell, we're in a very undecorated room right now. Our set is growing and building as we continue to make episodes. So each episode will have a new little Easter egg attached to it. And that being said, I don't have a great opening for this content just yet.
Yeah, this space is kind of giving me like Kendrick Lamar Squabble Up vibes. Just blank room.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
The wall in the background. Different colors.
Yeah, obviously, very different colors.
Yeah.
I'm currently watching through Severance on Apple TV, and I've made that my entire personality. So like I said, before we started recording, I said this reminds me of the Severance office space.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you said
that. Maybe there'll be an episode on Severance later. We don't know yet. We're still figuring it out. But
that.
Today, we're addressing, at the time of this recording, we just had the Oscars. These Oscars were a couple days ago. And so today it's theology and the Oscars. Maybe trying to address some questions around how does the church kind of approach an award show like the Oscars. We're going to talk about some of our favorite movies and then maybe just talk about film as a whole. So as we dive into this conversation, very high level, what'd you think? Did you watch the show? What were some of your thoughts? What did you like? What did you dislike about it?
I did. I watched, I would say, a good amount of the show. I watched most of it. I think I could safely say that. The main reason why I was switching was because the Lakers were on, so I was going back and forth. And my kids weren't enthralled with the Oscars, but I was still trying to nerd out. I love watching them. As you know, I'm a huge fan of movies, cinema, TV as well. So like I like seeing the Oscars where films go to compete against each other in some sense. So I like that.
It is always kind of like a strange concept to think of like artistic pieces competing. Like we're both big Laker and basketball fans, so that side of the world makes sense to me. And I think I sometimes bring like my small group got together to watch the Oscars, and
I love that.
Cool. One of my group members, he printed out an entire like ballot sheet. And so we all like cast our own votes for what we thought was going to win each category. And then at the end of the night, whoever had the most correct picks won like a gift card or something like that.
I love that.
So
that's cool.
It was fun to kind of make it a little bit more engaging that way.
Yeah.
I thought the show was great. I thought they obviously went over on time, but I thought like it was a little bit more concise. And
as they always do.
I thought Conan did a good job. I didn't have any real issues with him.
Dude, Conan is witty, man.
Yeah.
He's so good. I don't want to knock Jimmy Kimmel and other hosts over the years, but Conan O'Brien is in a different category for me in terms of like his genius in delivering a punchline. So.
Right.
And he doesn't hold back. Like he'll go to certain places, as he did with some of these actresses and actors there. Obviously, like So
he was making fun of some of our own people. Of course, as a Kendrick Lamar fan, I thought the Kendrick halftime joke was hilarious. It was a little ironic to see all of Hollywood make that kind of joke. Where I'm like, are you guys making fun of yourselves on top of this? I don't know. But overall, I thought the show was great. I really liked. This has got a lot of mixed reviews. I really liked the James Bond honoring like showcase thing kind of in the middle. I thought that was done really well with all the different singers they had. I thought that was pretty dope.
Yeah.
So
only because those songs have been so iconic in every Bond film. It's like, oh, who's gonna do the song and when's it gonna come in? You know, so it's been one of those great pieces of cinema history to honor and celebrate. So I love the beginning too, like the Defying Gravity piece, Cynthia, Ariana. It was very good.
That was actually the one part I missed because we were just waking my son up from a nap and we were kind of getting out of the house. So we missed that opening part, which is a bummer because my wife would have loved watching that part, but I saw the rest of it. Yeah. Are you not tired of defying gravity yet?
No, I look to defy gravity every day. No, I like it, man. I love the way that she interprets it. I'm one of the ones who saw the movie and then went back and saw the play or watched the play. But yeah, her voice is something else, man. So yeah, I thought the movie was great. It was really good.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think I didn't see the movie because I'm not super into musicals.
yeah,
My wife saw it. She loved it. She's been singing the song every day since then. But I did see the play. So I do have some respect for it. And from what I did see from my wife, like rewatching it at home, I think Cynthia probably had the best shot at winning Best Actress. She was who I was pulling for. Like she was
yeah,
super believable. Um, but yeah,
yeah.
the way musicals are like written and the music that plays with it, I'm not a super big fan of. So
Yeah, I wish I would have looked up before this how many musicals have previously won, or I should say, actors or actresses in a lead role have won in
mm,
musicals. Because I wonder if the style of film that it was, the kind of movie it was, impacted her acting chops. Or,
mm,
I don't know how to phrase that, but like, she was great as Elphaba.
yeah,
Like her face, her demeanor, her delivery, her emotion, like you were so drawn in, So, but I'm curious if like because it was a musical, if people who were in charge of voting and selecting the winner, like just I don't know, knocked it maybe down
hmm
a few compared to the other actresses,
hmm
But I thought she was deserving. I really thought it was gonna
yeah.
be a home run. So I remember when the movie was out, all of the attention it was getting. I'm like, this is on its way to the Oscars, like
Yeah.
already, So, but.
That kind of leads us to one of the things we were talking about before we started filming. And I feel like there's like two sides of the Oscars. There's the movies that literally the whole world saw and loved and was super excited about.
Yeah.
And then there's the movies that are a
No
little
one
bit more
saw.
obscure. You kind of got to be into the cinema world to like dive into this.
Yeah.
So I first want to start with the two movies you and I have loved, Dune 2 and Wicked.
Mm.
And then maybe at the tail end we can kind of talk about movies as a whole and some of the other films that we've been watching. But
Yeah.
let's start there. I saw the first Dune movie, fell in love immediately. I like that sci-fi genre.
And you've read the book.
Yes,
Okay.
I've read the first three books of Dune. So
Okay.
Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. Very
My goodness.
dense, very like just world building type of reads.
Yeah.
But I absolutely loved them.
Okay.
And I love them because it's addressing Messiah figures.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Timothy Chalamet is playing Paul Atreides. Muad'Dib, Lisan al-Gaib, all these crazy things where he is like,
bro.
he's this Messiah figure for this religion in the planet of Arrakis. And from some of the conversations I've heard, it's, pointing to the idea of Paul being a savior and our need for that. To some instances, I believe is true. However, in these two movies, I think what the story is getting at is kind of addressing what happens when we put the wrong people as Messiah figures.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I've read the book, so I've seen past where the movies are at. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but we start to navigate in Dune 2, like we have this person, Timothy Chalamet, who on the front end of the movie is like, I don't want this power. I don't want to be this person. And by the time we reach the end, he has fully absorbed this title of Messiah for these people. So
Mm-hmm.
those are some of my initial thoughts thinking through the movie. I haven't watched it since I saw it in theaters because I'm trying to catch up on last year's movies. But what were some of like your thoughts around Dune, around like what we can take from it, all those kinds of things? I feel like I yapped a little bit there.
Yeah. I loved the way that they positioned characters to kind of embody certain perspectives when it comes to the Messiah figure, right? So you have his love interest who's portrayed by the sweet why am I blanking on-
Zendaya.
Yeah, Zendaya did a phenomenal job in her own right. Like I love her character, and she has, I think, a suspicious view towards this prophecy, towards the Messiah altogether, and who really should liberate their planet. And then you got Javier Bardem's character, who's like very much, he's so good, like into this Messiah figure. So I feel like they did a great job of articulating the various positions as it relates to it, And I do like, you pointed out Paul's like initial reluctancy to become this like leader who's gonna, rebel and deliver them. But then by the end of the film, like he's fully into it, like he is exercising his power as a Messiah. He is a military figure, which in a lot of instances, you have some of the early followers of Jesus also wanting him to be a military figure, to be a political figure who sets Israel free from the powers of Rome and the oppressor at the time. So there's, I think, some intentional kind of parallelism happening there, and it does kind of speak to even our moment today of how we relate to whether it be people in power or Messiah figures. The term out there is like, he's got a Messiah complex,
Yeah.
and that is for sure alluded to, I think, in some of Paul's dialogue, especially at the end, without ruining everything. But if you haven't seen Dune 2 now, but like, what are you doing?
Right.
But he's got some very specific language when they initiate war and when they do some things that I'm like, dude, he's very much believing in who he is, But then other moments where he's actually willing, I think, to try to leverage his power for a good cause, which is what I think makes the person of Jesus very different when it comes to the Messiah conversation because of how he handles authority and power, that we can dive into that later. But yeah, I think, I don't know, like the director's religious background, Denny's like kind of religious upbringing, he's French and a few other things. So I would imagine there's some like Catholic stuff happening in there, especially with the sisters and like the role they play. They have a very Pharisaical, like religious hypocrisy view, where they say that at one point they say, we don't hope, we plan.
Right.
Oh my gosh, we don't hope, we plan. Like, again, that I think rightly articulates the way that they are manipulating religion and its ability to sway people into holy war, into these ideas that are not like good for all of human flourishing, and so there's definitely like a lot of, I think, overlap from whatever his experience might be with religion and how it's kind of portrayed through this story.
I do know Frank Herbert from like the, about the authors and stuff that I've read while reading these books. He was pretty anti-religion.
Yeah.
So his initial writing of the Dune stories was not to necessarily show a need for Messiah figures. His initial writing was to kind of poke holes in the thought and the idea of putting faith in one person, this kind of religious nationalism. He's poking at all these ideas. And what makes the story so interesting is that I think the more that we poke at, religious fanaticism, bringing it into like a national identity, is that it does miss in the entirety of like who Jesus was. Like Paul, while taking this on, seeks after the power of being this figure. Yet when we read in scriptures in the Bible, Jesus is the exact opposite. He offers his own life instead of bringing into this holy war. So I think it's just a great way to kind of like take in a perspective of someone that maybe doesn't know as much on, our side of the story, but is still kind of giving you their perspective on messiahs and what that means. So
yeah, because I think for any modern person, who's thinking about like, okay, if I believed in a Messiah, what would I want them to like have as characteristic traits, And you have to imagine like potentially in Jesus, you have everything you could possibly want in a Messiah figure, specifically in the way that he leverages his power, uses his authority, and is for sure a revolutionary, but he's a revolutionary in a way that's completely like flipping upside down what we expect from someone who's going to lead a revolt, and liberate everyone in the best kind of way. Like he's radically different, and so, yeah, I think that's a helpful question. What would you want in a Messiah?
Yeah.
And tell me that all those things that you would want are not also found in him.
Right.
Because I think that's what makes Jesus so compelling, So while Dune 2, I think, rightly addresses our problems with Messiah figures and the issues we've even seen in our own history with our own like religions, that we kind of have and that people are familiar with, there is still, I think, a way forward that just makes Jesus all the more unique.
Yeah.
And why you can't just easily dismiss him with the rest of them, Specifically, as you mentioned, in the way that he actually sacrifices himself, So now, if Paul does that, we'll see. You've read the books. There's still a third movie to come out, so we'll see what they end up doing with that. But I would be curious to see how they ultimately allow his character to develop into what a Messiah should be. you know, so.
These books, hands down, are some of my favorite reads.
Wow.
Now, each 3 books took me probably almost a year to read through because it was just so, like, every new chapter is building some new aspect of the sisterhood and the Bene Gesserit or the Fremen people. But they were such captivating reads that I was hooked in the entire time. The other question I wanted to ask you, specifically around Dune 2, your perspective on the two sides of the coin, where you have Javier Bardem's character that fully believes, he's bought in, he sees the prophecy, which is maybe mirroring Gen X and baby boomers, kind of their approach to it. And then you have Zendaya, who's very much so mirroring maybe the millennial and Gen Z kind of approach to things.
With the skepticism.
Yeah, with some of the skepticism.
Yeah.
I found it interesting, just to kind of give you a second to think through that. Like, how do you think that interacts in our culture today?
Yeah.
But I was also curious, and like, as Zendaya's character is following Paul Atreides, she's doubtful, but still kind of keeps following along to see.
She sees the signs.
Yeah, to see what is happening.
Yeah.
Do you think that's speaking to our culture at all, or?
Yeah, in the sense that, you know, they both come from the same tribe, and they both acknowledge they need deliverance, right? So whether you are suspicious of the Messiah, or you're like, you know, this person could do no wrong in my eyes, I love them for everything that they do, and you have zero suspicion, they both still recognize they need a Messiah. In other words, they need someone to save them, to deliver them, to set them free, you know? And so I think there's maybe a good common ground there with kind of how you were understanding the various generations, you know, seeing their relationship to the Messiah, starting there. Like, we are in agreement that we need deliverance from something or someone, you know. The problem is on who we decide that deliverer will be, you know. But I think what's great about Zendaya's character is that there's really key moments where she cannot dismiss the signs that she sees in Paul Atreides, you know, and the character qualities that he has. You know, obviously at the very end, there's quite a bit of a turn that leaves her having to make an important decision, you know. So, but yeah, I think the common ground is they need a Messiah. So, and they both still fight the same war, you know. So they're both still giving themselves and risking their own lives for a cause that they have some common ground with, you know, which in their mind is a freedom, is a way of life that's not under the control of the suppressor, you know, who's trying to exploit their planet and what they have to offer to the rest of the universe, you know. So I think there's some common ground in those two things. So but
That's a bar. I know I watched it, but I didn't even make that connection of like, they still fought the war together. At the end of the day, their need for deliverance still brought them into the same path.
Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy. That's crazy. So let me talk about the other obviously very big movie from last year that we've already alluded to, Wicked.
Wicked.
Which my first initial thought that I think is very interesting about film.
Sorry, you gotta get your question out.
Can you hit the same notes that Ariana is hitting?
Oh God, no, man, not yet. No one wants the wicked. People are gonna shut this off right about now.
If we haven't lost them yet, we're losing them now. I'm going to lean more on you because, again, I haven't seen all of Wicked. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the story and how it can kind of relate to us. But I'm also interested in this shift that we're kind of seeing in movies of taking more time in stories. Because I know Wicked was technically a part 1.
Yeah.
The full story is not completely told. So on the front end of talking about the Oscars, you know, all of these movies, these things that didn't win and the things that did win, we're starting to see people spending more time in telling stories versus just kind of churning out films that are, you know, kind of dorky rom-coms. Like I'm seeing a shift into like we're sitting with stories a lot longer.
Yeah, they're not as flat. They're not as flat as, you know, other stories and characters are. So, and I think that's what's great about Wicked Part 1, as it's being kind of deemed, you know, is Elphaba, this main character, she is the witch. But there's layers to her. She's nuanced. And one great principle we'll get to some of the other themes that are in there about her being kind of estranged or on the fringes, you know, kind of villainized, but she's actually the one who can right what's going on in Oz, you know. But one thing that I like about her character, at least the way the movie was portraying it, was her gifting and her powers come out of suffering and come out of a place of pain. You know, like she was born, she didn't have any power over that, but the environment that she's born into leads her to live a kind of life and also develop a kind of power and identity that I think is really important to notice, that like we actually can receive some of the greatest gifts out of like the pain of our lives, the suffering that we experience, you know, and those very gifts that we're given can be used to actually right the ship in a sense, you know, and hopefully in an ideal situation, her powers of which are actually used for good,
Right.
you know, and I think she actually desires to do that. She ends up at the school mainly to look after her sister, you know. So I think, yeah, there's something to sit with there in that character. Because I remember Jeff Goldblum when he was on the red carpet being interviewed for this movie, and he was like responding to a question about villains, and he's like, "Well, there are no villains in this movie," you know, and he makes a statement like that, so to speak. And I thought, like, oh yeah, that's a common take we see in movies today, in these stories. You know, there are no villains, but that's okay. But explore what you mean by that, and like help us understand why these characters aren't flat. You just don't have evil and good, but you have like a fully developed individual who has a story. Coming to understand the story helps you understand their unique woundedness and how that brokenness in their life is playing out or harming others, you know. And so for her, Elphaba, we know as the audience, is for sure the hero, but is draped in green and black because everyone wants to know that she's the villain, you know. So, but yeah.
How do you think? I believe that we're seeing that kind of happen more often in movies, where your villain, quote unquote, actually is this person with multiple layers and backgrounds and stuff like that. And I've heard one side of the conversation that is like super for it, like we're unpacking the things that happen in our lives that get us to a certain point. And then I hear the other side of the conversation that is a little bit more grouchy and just trying to say that we're getting rid of truth and all these kinds of things. So how do you approach that, I guess, that kind of concept in your movies of the ones that are like, well, there is really no villain?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where it requires some level of discernment, you know, like, so if you are a person of faith, you have to make a decision as to like how this story might impact you, the way you see the world, the way you understand your own personal faith, the way you relate to God and other people, you know. You got to use discernment around the morality of the film or what's going on in it, you know. And so, yeah, if a message is coming out that strong that, you know, there are no absolutes, everyone's just kind of deciding for their own, like, all right, but like that in and of itself is making an absolute statement, you know. And so I think it becomes pretty clear that there is a right and wrong. There is a right and wrong in this universe, you know. I think Glinda, at some level, comes to understand what's right about helping and identifying with Elphaba and becoming her friend, you know. And so I think there are places where it's like, no, we can say this is objectively true and this is objectively right in terms of how you treat people, how you treat animals who talk, right? All those kinds of things. So like there are places where it's very clear that despite what you might think the message is, there's some moments where it's like, yo, this is pretty obvious in terms of their stance on morality, you know? So, and then when it also comes to conscience though, like it is a movie about witches. And so like if that...
And talking animals.
Yeah, talking animals. And so if that bothers you or your faith because of what the implications of that might be for other things we know about from the Bible or from other religions, and like, yeah, you want to honor your conscience and not partake in it, you know. And so I try to be very open-handed and charitable with where people are at when it comes to like, what's the message of this? Should I watch this? What does this mean for us? You know, and just allow the lens of the director to just like guide me in their perspective, you know. So when you think about like movies or TV shows, what you're doing in that moment for 2 hours, 3 hours, or whatever the time is, like you're sitting down and you're allowing the director to have you see the world the way they see the world, or the way they want you to see the world through this story, which I think is a very empathetic thing to do. I think it's a mark of compassion. So that's why I like storytelling. I like storytellers. I'm infatuated with behind the scenes, right? Because I like to get in their mind and hear why they did that and why they chose those colors, you know. And so to submit yourself to the theater experience and watch a movie is you're saying, okay, for this amount of money, like take me into your world. Show me your point of view. So I'm down for that. Take me into your point of view, you know? And so as someone who follows Jesus, I want to I want to learn how to do that well for people, you know? So I think, and watching movies is a way to be like, all right, I'm going to enter your point of view, your perspective, and try to see the world the way you see the world, or the way you want me to see the world through this story, you know? So that's what I think is great about storytelling in film, you know? So, and I think with that, like, they want you to see the world from Elphaba's perspective in a lot of ways, and what she's a victim of too, as well, you know? So I think there's something to be said there in that.
Yeah. There's so much good in that, and what you just said too. And I think there is some of that aspect of, well, we have these films that are kind of unpacking maybe the various villains we see in our lives. Like, I was a big fan of the first Joker movie that came out a couple years ago, where it's like, again, painting this picture of someone that murders people in the movie, like in a train, and feels no remorse about it. And while on one side of things we could be talking about like, oh, it's all, you know, objective, everyone's finding their own way. I think it's also dealing with the reality in that a lot of people are missing, is your choices still determine who you are. So even if you're figuring this out on your own, you are making choices that are going to affect your life in a long-lasting implication. And I think the beauty of the Bible and the gospel is these choices, as wrong as they may be, have been forgiven by the blood of Jesus Christ. And so I think that kind of brings us into an interesting perspective, where we navigate the tough decisions people have made through the storytelling that we've seen, and still have a savior that we can turn to that says like, hey, even at your lowest, you can find hope and restoration in this space. So
that's good.
I think tying that back into Wicked, I'm talking Dune and Wicked specifically because I feel like those are two movies that were snubbed out of a lot of awards. That was kind of that was the conversation.
Yeah, but I mean, we talk about the Oscars, like they opened with Ariana and Cynthia belting their lungs out in a beautiful way, and then like don't honor them with any other award the rest of the night. Like it's kind of like, dang, y'all just wanted them for your show. It seemed like
I mean, they both did win some pretty significant awards. Like Wicked won Best Costume Design.
Okay, yeah, they did.
Which was huge. I watched that award. That man was the first black man to ever win the award too. So like, there was some pretty big cultural moments. Dune won for a lot of like visual effects and sound effects kind of stuff.
Yeah, their visual effects were in.
It was fantastic. It takes a lot for me to like get into a different world like that. And Dune, I felt like I was in the middle of it.
We were watching scenes earlier today, and I was like, just in a minute in, like, oh my gosh, I got to finish this. Good.
So we talked about our favorite movies. Let's kind of talk about a little bit the Oscars as a whole as we kind of get close to wrapping this up a little bit. I personally believe this is one of the best years for the Best Picture category.
Why do you think that?
The movies that I have on my list to watch, Conclave, Nickel Boys, the Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin one. I forget.
A Real Pain?
Yes.
Yeah.
All of those look fantastic. I really want to see The Brutalist. I saw Dune. They all were fantastic movies. I think we're going to talk about Conclave at a different point in time, but
the ghost in here.
It's the Holy Spirit saying, watch yourself.
Say, wrap it up.
Yeah, that too. Anyway, I think the storytelling aspect in these movies was some of the best storytelling that we've had in a while. And so in comparison to past years where the movies were maybe just felt a little bit more like, oh, I'm just trying to push the boundary of what I can do in a film versus telling a good story.
Yeah.
I think there was some aspects of boundary pushing, and there's a couple movies where as much as I would be interested in hearing that story, I just know are not great for me to watch. Like the Anora won Best Picture.
Yeah.
And it's about the life of a sex worker. And it's like, as much as I might be intrigued by that story and how great it visually looks, there's just certain things that I don't need to bring in. My wife's not comfortable with me watching. So it's like, okay, respectfully, I'm just going to bow out of this one. So
respectfully? Cue the meme. Yeah. Respectfully?
But
sorry, I just threw you off.
No. Yeah, you're good. I was just thinking through like the storytelling aspect as a whole. These were almost all of them were legitimately stories where I'm like, oh, I'm interested and curious in hearing about that story. Even in some of the documentaries and some of the short films, I was like super bought in. Like the list that I saved the entire list of was the best animated features. Because when I was watching the show and seeing clips from that, I was like, that looks so like crazy. I want to be able to watch that one too. So
Yeah.
I don't even know where I'm going with this statement or the question I have for you, but
You were talking about you thought this year Best Picture had truly some of the best storytelling wrapped up in those movies. Beyond just trying to like get a message across, you thought
Yeah.
the stories themselves were rich. Yeah.
I feel like they were addressing a lot more. They were addressing a lot more topics of who we are as people versus just let me push the boundaries on what I can do in film. Because you look at, again, the categories of like Adrian Brody in The Brutalist, he won Best Actor.
Story of an Immigrant.
Yeah, Story of an Immigrant. Holocaust survivor in The Brutalist. Like Dune 2 is just, taking a look at our religious views
The
and
way we relate to
Messiah,
religion,
Messiah figures, Dune or Wicked. Like all these different things are approaching different aspects. Even A Complete Unknown, we're talking about Bob Dylan and his life and the impact of his music throughout these generations. I thought these were some of the best told stories we've had in a while. Now, I could watch some of these and be wrong, but what were some of your thoughts? Is like you've just kind of taken an approach to now the Oscars as a whole, what we're doing in film. Like, are you seeing any shifts in like how we're creating stories?
Yeah, I think, every year the Best Picture grouping creates a lot of buzz and conversation because it can be very polarizing and upsetting when your favorite movie is not in there, or you feel like what you loved is a great film, but it's not going to get the attention it deserves because it didn't share the right message or the right message that we currently want to hear or uplift, right? So it's a really delicate situation as I just observe culture and where we're at and obviously participate in it too, is like sometimes the narrative that like has the biggest backing is just going to get lifted up. And that could harm, I think, our good storytelling or like honest storytelling, so I see what you're saying in terms of like you thought this year had a great group of films that were just really good stories beyond what kind of maybe agenda they had or what kind of message they're trying to push. There was just some really rich stories in there, even if some of them are maybe a little intense or not like your cup of tea or you won't go there. Like there's something I guess to be considered with that. So
in no way, shape, or form am I saying every movie on this list is a good movie. You should all go watch it.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's several on them where I'm like,
yeah,
I'm not going to watch that one.
Not going to watch the. You watched The Substance.
I did watch The Substance.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I've seen a clip of it and it scared me.
It is a horror film. I went into the movie blind, so I did no research about the movie beforehand. And I think if I would have, I probably wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah. The synopsis though was pretty like, wow, this is actually pretty important to think about.
I think Demi Moore did a fantastic job, and so did Margaret. I forget how to pronounce her last name. It was just there was just a lot of nudity in it. Yeah. So at a certain point, I was just like, all right, I just got to close my eyes now because it's French film. They're a little extra on some of that stuff. So I was like, you know what? They're not talking. I don't need to keep my eyes open for this. We can get it. And it spoke, I think as a story, it spoke good to like beauty standards for women and how we approach some of those things.
And kudos to Demi Moore playing that. I mean, growing up watching her in films, she would be cast and stuff because of how beautiful she was, like the way that she looks, So I would imagine that role meant something important for her to take. As someone who's aged, and matured and maybe doesn't meet the criteria of what she once meant. So I could see where she was like, this is an important role for me to take, even if it's going to be pretty intense or gross or push the boundaries. At some
again,
point,
it was one of those things where like I was like, I don't know if I would have watched this. I'm very hesitant, specifically in church circles. I'm like very, very like, be careful if you want to watch this. It can open a door very easily. But I mean, to people outside of the church, I totally understand why they love it and what they're pushing for in that movie. So yeah, I don't know. I think there was, as a whole, I think film is starting to shift from maybe shock value into actually telling interesting and intriguing stories. Because like the other big one that was getting a lot of buzz was Emilia Perez, which I saw one clip on TikTok, one of their musical numbers, and I'm already not a musical fan. And I was like, Selena, I don't know how you're fumbling a Spanish accent so bad right now, but you are. So didn't see Emilia Perez, but that very quickly fell out of like the conversation of Best Winner and stuff like that. So who knows? Maybe next year it'll be completely different, and the movies are all garbage, and we'll see.
I do think, to your point, in a moment where there's a lot of polarization in the greater culture, where like almost everything's politicized, the role of the arts is even more important, right? Because the role of the arts can help us like recover an imagination where we see people again, where we see these issues as deeply tied to real people, right? And I think it helps maybe lower the temperature of a room
Yeah.
when there's so much hostility, so much violence towards each other. Like the arts can play like a healing role in society. Like I really do believe that, So I hope you're right in that stories continue to be told in that way that allow us to, see each other again and make the kind of movement we want to make when it comes to the larger issues of life, because I think any good story is raising questions that are deeply meaningful to our lives as people.
Yeah.
And how we understand ourselves, how we relate to people, how our view of the world, like all of those things are discussed in film, and so arts, they have a way to disarm us in a moment where we really just want to be at each other's throats, so I think there's something good to come from this,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the last question I'll pitch for you
Yeah.
before we wrap this up. In your observing the whole situation, observing film, and you kind of just shared it of bringing empathy and hearing people's stories. But for the Christian listening to this, what is your best thought or piece of advice on how to approach an industry that is maybe generally or traditionally been more hostile to religious belief, but is now kind of opening up to just different conversation points?
Yeah, I think I want to give credit to there's a writer out there. His name is Brett McCracken, and he offered a framework around what he called like a Christ-like gaze, having a Christ-like gaze. In other words, when you're watching a movie or you're a person of faith watching a movie, there's a way to have a Christ-like gaze, which means like you do try to allow the movie to bring you into their perspective. And then he gave out kind of like three thoughts. I might butcher this whole thing completely, but the first one he talked about was compassion, right? So a movie, when it's done well, can bring you close enough to another person's situation where compassion is your response, not condemnation. The second thing he talked about was, I think, attentiveness, which means characters aren't flat. The point of the story is not to make money or to sell a new doll at Target, right? Like movies have to go beyond just being like utility. Like it's valuable because it's going to make everyone a lot of money, or it's a blockbuster and everyone just want to be entertained for 90 minutes. But there's an attentiveness that allows us to linger long enough and like learn more about this person. Like there's a depth there, right?
Yeah.
And then the last thing he talks about is the combination of suffering and hope. So if you can approach a movie that embodies well just the reality of human suffering, but doesn't lose sight of hope, then I think you have like a Christ-like approach to watching movies. And you can honor them, even when they're made by people who aren't Christians, because they're touching on things that are very true. Like we will all suffer. Life is suffering. But can you hold on to hope in the way that Jesus offers us hope in the resurrection and in the new life, the abundant life that he offers us and promises us, And so I think as you think through, am I going to watch this movie, or what I like about this film, maybe consider those three aspects: compassion, attentiveness, and then suffering and hope, and then it hopefully will elevate your appreciation for stories, for filmmakers, for messages that maybe don't completely align with how you see the world and what your faith is, but they do honor all of us as human beings and help us maybe better understand each other, know? And so I've appreciated his insight into that, and I think it bears true, when it comes to selecting movies or just being moved by stuff, So, but because stories are important, man. I think of Grant Morrison. He wrote a book called Super Gods, and in there he says, "We live in the stories we tell ourselves. We live in the stories we tell ourselves. So the stories that we love to tell ourselves are the stories that we believe we're living in, and in other words, they help us make sense of our own lives, And so, because of that, movies are important. Like they serve a real role. And there's probably a reason that movie resonates with you, or that character resonates with you, or the way the music hits with that lighting and that environment. Like there's something about what you're watching that helps you make sense of your personal story, And so because of that, film will always have an important role. And I think for people of faith, people who follow Jesus or identify as Christian, what have you, like there's a lot for us to play with when it comes to this, you know, and also to like dialogue with others on it, you know. So I think it's really critical. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I love about the award circuit is at the very root of it, it just starts the conversation of like, yo, this won. What do you think? Should this have won? Should have this movie won? And that's one of the things I enjoy about these spaces is like, okay, cool. I get to hear your perspective on why you think this movie was fantastic or why you think this movie was garbage.
Yeah.
You and I have conversations all the time where you're like, bro, you got to check this out. And I'm like, that's trash.
Yeah. Well, even the other day, you walked me through the kind of central message of Anora, which I won't watch. But as you broke it down, I'm like, yo, I think that's really important for me to think about. Like, how would I treat a sex worker who feels like that's all they have to offer because of the system that they've been shaped and formed in?
Yeah.
You know, like, dang, I got to think about that. You know, so yeah, there's still something there. You know? So yeah.
And there's a reality of dealing with like, if it's something that you are personally convicted by of not watching, like I think there's freedom in that too.
For sure.
But just being aware of like the things that we're taking in and how we view like certain things, like when you think of classic movies, I think there's reasons movies like Saving Private Ryan have left such a lasting impact because it deals with like the deep, gross reality of war and World War II and what these young men went through.
Yeah.
And that there's probably the Christian, you know, quote unquote case for why you shouldn't watch violence in movies like that. But it also brings us into a personal point of conviction of like, how are we treating other people? How are we navigating these things in the world? So, yeah, I don't know, I'm super intrigued in the conversations that it kickstarts and I'm excited to see what films come out this year.
Yeah. Next year, we'll watch the Oscars together.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
As long as the Lakers aren't playing.
Well, who knows? With the Lakers, they could be absolutely garbage a year from now. Like,
no.
Lakers now. Lakers.
No. Let's end this episode.
What is this?
Let's end this episode.
March 5th. As a loving, heartbroken Laker fan, March 5th, 2025, the Lakers are fantastic. March 5th, 2024, the Lakers were garbage.
Well, yeah.
We were in like 10th place.
Yeah, we were
struggling to get the play in.
Yeah. We're fighting.
That was Darvin Ham's fault. I'll put it there, but you know.
Oh, man.
Chat, friends, I don't know. I use slang that I shouldn't as a 31-year-old. Thank you for watching the Theology and Show. My name is McKay. I'm joined Pastor Fredo. If you're liking this content, please like, leave a comment, subscribe, share with a friend. All those things help our channel grow organically and reach new people.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon for maybe another film. Maybe we'll talk March Madness. Who knows? We'll see. But
grace and peace, y'all.
Later.